For 12,000 years, every species in the galaxy followed one rule. It was not written in any law book. It was not enforced by any police force. But every child of every race learned it before they learned anything else. Never go near the Sol system. Never wake the humans. The ancient records were unclear about why this rule existed. The elder races who had created it were long dead, turned to dust before most current civilizations had learned to make fire. But the warnings they left behind were clear enough. In the Sol system lived a species unlike any other. They were not the strongest. They were not the smartest. They were not the most advanced. But they were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. Commander Vethel of the Drakkarian Empire had heard these stories since he was a hatchling. His nursery teachers had whispered them to frighten children into obedience. His military instructors had mentioned them as historical curiosities. But Vethel was not a creature who believed in old tales. He was a conqueror. His people had built an empire across 47 star systems. They had crushed the crystalline hegemony in a war that lasted 3 centuries. They had forced the proud Velkari to kneel and serve. What could a single species on a single planet possibly do against the might of the Dracorian war machine? The answer, Vethel believed, was nothing. Absolutely nothing. When his scouts reported rich mineral deposits on the 4th planet of the Sol system, Vethel saw only opportunity. The humans, his advisors told him, had barely achieved spaceflight. Their ships were slow and primitive. They had visited their own moon a few times and sent simple robots to nearby planets. They spent most of their energy fighting among themselves over patches of land and differences in belief. They would fall within days. Vethel assembled his invasion fleet in secret. 200 warships, each one capable of destroying a continent. 50,000 ground troops, veterans of a dozen campaigns. He did not inform the Galactic Concordat of his plans. The old fools would only try to stop him, citing their ancient superstitions. By the time they learned what he had done, the humans would already be conquered, and the Sol system would belong to the Drakkarian Empire. The fleet entered human space on what the natives called a Tuesday morning. They emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, blocking out the sun over every major human city. Vethel stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked down at the small blue planet. It was beautiful, he admitted. Green and blue and white, covered in water and life. It would make a fine addition to his empire. He broadcast his demands in every human language. His translators had spent months learning their primitive tongues. The message was simple: surrender unconditionally or face complete destruction. He gave them 1 of their hours to respond. On the surface below, a young naval officer named Daniel Reyes watched the broadcast from his station in San Diego. The sky was dark with alien ships. The streets were full of screaming people. Every television and phone and computer showed the same image: a tall, reptilian creature demanding humanity's surrender. Daniel's hands shook as he watched. But they did not shake from fear. They shook from something else, something he could not name. Around him, his fellow officers had the same look in their eyes. It was not the look of defeated men. It was the look of animals backed into a corner. It was the look of hunters who had just spotted their prey. Within minutes, the response came. It did not come from any government. It did not come from any military command. It came from everywhere at once, from every human on the planet who had access to a radio or transmitter. The message was crude and uncoordinated, but it said the same thing in 1,000 different ways. No, humanity would not surrender. Humanity had never learned how. Vethel received the response with confusion. He had conquered dozens of species. All of them had surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. It was the logical thing to do. Why would any creature choose death over submission? He ordered his communications officer to repeat the demand, assuming there had been some misunderstanding. The second response was even clearer than the first. It contained words that Vethel's translators struggled to interpret. Words that seemed to be insults of the most creative and vulgar nature. One human military commander, speaking from a bunker somewhere in the mountains, delivered a speech that would later become famous across the galaxy. He said that the Drakkarians could take their demands and placed them in an anatomically impossible location. He said that Earth would fight. He said that every human being, from the oldest grandmother to the youngest child, would resist until their last breath. Then he said something that made Vethelus's blood run cold. He said that the Dracorians had made a mistake. He said that humanity had been waiting for this moment for their entire existence. He said that every war they had ever fought against each other had been nothing but practice. And now, finally, they had a real enemy to unite against. Vethel ordered the bombardment to begin. The first plasma bolts struck the planet's surface at noon. Cities burned. Millions died in the first hour. The humans had no shields, no energy weapons, no technology that could match Dracorian firepower. By every logical calculation, they should have surrendered within minutes. They did not surrender. They fought back with everything they had. Primitive aircraft rose to meet Dracorian fighters. Ships that had never been designed for combat charged at the invasion fleet. Soldiers with weapons that could barely scratch Dracorian armor through themselves, at landing parties with no regard for their own survival, and then something unexpected happened. The humans started winning. Not the war. Not yet. But small victories began to accumulate. A farmer in Kansas shot down a Dracorian scout with a hunting rifle, hitting the weak point in its armor that no one should have known about. A teenager in Tokyo hacked into Dracorian communication frequencies using equipment made from household electronics. A retired engineer in Ohio figured out how to disrupt alien shields using a modified microwave oven. Daniel Reyes led a group of survivors out of the ruins of San Diego. They had no vehicles, no supplies, and no plan. But they had something else. They had the same fire in their eyes that humans had carried since they first climbed down from the trees and decided to hunt the animals that hunted them. That night, as fires burned across the planet, Vethel looked at the casualty reports and felt something he had never felt before. It took him a moment to recognize it. He had conquered 47 worlds. He had never experienced this emotion. It was fear. The elder races had been right. The humans should never have been awakened. And now it was too late to put them back to sleep. The Dracorian ground forces expected an easy conquest. They had studied human military capabilities for months before the invasion. They knew exactly how many tanks the humans had, how many aircraft, how many soldiers. The numbers were laughable. A single Dracorian battalion could defeat most human nations. The invasion would be over in days, perhaps weeks at most. They were wrong. The first landing force touched down in the American Midwest, the flat farmland of Kansas. 5,000 Dracorian soldiers in heavy armor, supported by aircraft and artillery. They expected to find frightened farmers and scattered police officers. Instead, they found something that would haunt their nightmares for generations. They found humans who were not afraid to die. Within the first hour, the landing force lost 300 soldiers, not to tanks or aircraft or any weapon they had anticipated. They lost them to farmers with hunting rifles, to teenagers with homemade explosives, to old women with kitchen knives. The humans attacked from every direction at once. They hid in cornfields and barns and drainage ditches. They struck without warning and vanished before the Dracorians could respond. One Dracorian officer, in his final report before a 12-year-old girl killed him with a crossbow, wrote that fighting humans was like fighting water. You could not grab them. You could not hold them. They flowed around every obstacle and found every weakness. Across the planet, the pattern repeated. Every city became a fortress. Every road became an ambush. Every human became a soldier. Admiral Catherine Moore coordinated the defense from a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. She was 63 years old and had served in 3 conflicts during her career. She had seen combat in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. But she had never seen anything like the reports that crossed her desk in those first. Terrible days. The humans were adapting faster than should have been possible. Scientists who had spent their entire lives in peaceful research now worked around the clock on weapons and countermeasures. Factories that had produced cars and televisions and toys pivoted to manufacturing equipment for war. Every university, every laboratory, every garage workshop became part of the effort. Within 3 days, the first human-made anti-aircraft weapons appeared. They were crude things, built from parts salvaged from the ruins of destroyed cities. But they worked. Dracorian aircraft began falling from the sky. Within a week, humans had figured out how to penetrate Dracorian armor. The weak points were small, barely visible to the naked eye. But human snipers learned to hit them with terrifying accuracy. Dracorian soldiers began to fear open ground. Within 2 weeks, the first captured Dracorian equipment was reverse-engineered and improved. Human engineers did not simply copy alien technology. They made it better. They found inefficiencies that Dracorian designers had never noticed. They combined alien components with human ingenuity in ways that no one had ever imagined. Daniel Reyes led his resistance cell through the ruins of Los Angeles. They had grown from a handful of survivors to 300 fighters in just 10 days. They lived in the sewers and subway tunnels, emerging at night to strike Dracorian patrols. They had no formal training, no military structure, no supply lines, but they had something more valuable. They had the refusal to give up. One night, Daniel's cell captured a Dracorian soldier alive. It was the first time any human resistance group had managed this feat. The soldier was young by Dracorian standards, barely out of training. Through a crude translation program built by a former linguistics professor, Daniel began to ask questions. What he learned changed his understanding of everything. The soldier was terrified, not of death. Dracorians did not fear death in battle. He was terrified of humans. He said that the Dracorian commanders were in a state of panic. Nothing was going according to plan. The humans were not behaving like any conquered species in recorded history. Most species, the soldier explained, fought back at first. Some fought harder than others. But eventually they all broke. They saw their cities destroyed and their people killed, and they lost the will to resist. Surrender became preferable to extinction. The humans had lost more in 2 weeks than most species lost in entire wars. Millions were dead. Cities were burning. The planet's infrastructure was in ruins. By every calculation, they should have surrendered days ago. Instead, they were fighting harder than ever. The resistance was growing, not shrinking. Human attacks were becoming more sophisticated, not less. And most disturbing of all, the humans seemed to be enjoying it. The soldier used a word that had no direct translation. The closest meaning was something like the joy of a predator that has finally found worthy prey. He said that the human prisoners his unit had captured laughed when they were tortured. They smiled when they faced execution. They seemed to view the entire invasion as some kind of game that they intended to win. Daniel released a soldier and let him return to his people. He knew that the Dracorians would learn nothing useful from the encounter, but the soldier would tell others what he had seen. The fear would spread. In the mountains, Admiral Moore received reports of similar interrogations from around the world. The picture that emerged was both terrifying and exhilarating. The Dracorians had expected to conquer a primitive species. Instead, they had awakened something ancient and terrible. Humanity had spent its entire existence fighting for survival. They had fought against predators that were faster and stronger. They had fought against climates that should have killed them. They had fought against diseases that ravaged their populations. And most of all, they had fought against each other. Endless wars that had refined their killing ability to a razor edge. Every human alive was the descendant of survivors. Their ancestors had lived through ice ages and plagues and famines. They had faced extinction a dozen times and refused to die. That stubbornness, that absolute refusal to surrender, was written into their genes. The Dracorians had expected to find sheep. They had found wolves. Commander Vethel reviewed the casualty reports in his flagship and made. He called for reinforcements, not a few additional ships. He called for the entire reserve fleet of the Dracorian Empire. He told his superiors that the humans were more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced. They did not believe him. They thought he had gone soft. They sent the reinforcements anyway, if only to end the embarrassment of a stalled invasion. Those reinforcements would never arrive in time to make a difference. Because deep beneath the Nevada desert, human engineers were building something that would change the war forever. They called it the Defiance. And when it flew, the galaxy would learn that waking humanity had been the worst mistake in 12,000 years. 6 months after the invasion began, humanity was ready to strike back. The ship rose from beneath the Nevada desert like a metal monster emerging from its cave. It was called the Defiance, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human engineers had built it in secret, working in underground facilities that the Dracorian sensors could not detect. They had used captured alien technology, salvaged parts, and pure human stubbornness. Captain Samuel Drake stood on the bridge and looked at his crew. They were not professional astronauts. They were survivors. A former airline pilot, a video game designer who had learned to program alien systems, a mechanic who had figured out how to modify Dracorian engines, a teacher who had become an expert in alien communication frequencies. They had come together from the ruins of the old world to build something new. Drake had volunteered for this mission, knowing it was probably suicide. The Defiance was untested. Its systems were held together with improvised parts and desperate hope. It would be facing the entire Dracorian blockade fleet alone. But as he looked at the stars through the ship's viewport, he felt no fear. He felt only a cold, clear purpose. Behind him was Earth, scarred and burning but unbroken. Ahead was the enemy that had tried to destroy his world. He knew exactly what he needed to do. The Defiance launched at midnight. It accelerated faster than any Dracorian ship had ever recorded. Human engineers had found a flaw in Dracorian engine design, safety limiter that prevented the engines from reaching their full potential. The Dracorians had installed this limiter because running engines at full power was dangerous. Humans had removed it because they did not care about danger. The blockade fleet detected the ship too late. Their sensors were not designed to track something moving that fast. By the time they identified the threat, the Defiance was already among them, firing weapons that should not have existed. Human engineers had not simply copied Dracorian weapons. They had improved them. The alien designers had focused on efficiency and safety. Human designers had focused on one thing only: destruction. The Defiance's main gun fired bolts of energy that punched through Dracorian shields like paper. Its secondary weapons targeted weak points with surgical precision. Its missiles carried warheads that were crude but devastatingly effective. In the first hour of battle, the Defiance destroyed 14 Dracorian warships. In the second hour, it destroyed 20 more. The blockade fleet, which had held Earth prisoner for 6 months, began to scatter like frightened animals. Commander Vethel watched from his flagship in disbelief. His tactical officers were screaming information that made no sense. The human ship was faster than anything in the Dracorian fleet. Its weapons were more powerful. Its pilot flew with a skill that seemed almost supernatural, anticipating Dracorian movements before they happened. But the Defiance was only the beginning. On the surface below, Admiral Catherine Moore coordinated the ground offensive. Human resistance cells around the world had been preparing for this moment for months. They had stockpiled weapons, gathered intelligence, and waited for the signal to strike. That signal came at dawn, Earth time. Every human resistance group attacked simultaneously. In North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, everywhere the Dracorians had established a presence. Humans emerged from hiding and fought. The Dracorians had spread their forces thin. Trying to control an entire planet with 50,000 soldiers, now those soldiers found themselves surrounded by an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere. Farmers and teachers and doctors and engineers became warriors. Children who had grown up in the ruins of invaded cities became deadly fighters. The old, the young, the strong, the weak, everyone fought. Daniel Reyes led his cell in an assault on the Dracorian command center in what had been Los Angeles. 300 fighters against 2,000 Dracorian soldiers. The odds should have been impossible. But Daniel had learned something in 6 months of guerrilla warfare. Humans did not fight fair. They did not follow rules. They did whatever was necessary to win. His fighters attacked from the sewers, from rooftops, from inside buildings that should have been empty. They used explosives hidden in rubble. They used captured Dracorian weapons turned against their former owners. They used their bare hands when nothing else was available. By noon, the command center was in human hands. By sunset, every major Dracorian installation on the planet was under attack. Vethel understood that the war was lost. His fleet was broken. His ground forces were dying. The reinforcements he had called for were still days away, and even they might not be enough. He had two choices: order a retreat and save what remained of his forces, or stay and die with them. He chose retreat. It was the first time in the history of the Dracorian Empire that an invasion force had fled from a single planet. The remaining Dracorian ships gathered around Vethel's flagship and prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed. But before they left, Vethel transmitted a message to the Galactic Concordat. It was a message that would change the political landscape of the galaxy forever. He told them everything. He told them about the human adaptability, their refusal to surrender, their ability to improve alien technology. He told them about the soldiers who laughed while dying and the civilians who beck. AIM warriors overnight told them about the ship that had torn through his fleet like it was made of glass, and he told them the truth that the elder races had known 12,000 years ago. Humanity was not a species to be conquered. They were a species to be feared. They had spent their entire existence preparing for war, fighting against everything the universe could throw at them. Now they were awake, and they were angry, and they were coming for the stars. The message ended with a warning. Do not engage the humans. Do not provoke the humans. Do not make the same mistake the Dracorian Empire had made. 3 weeks later, the last Dracorian ship fled the Sol system. Behind them, they left the wreckage of their fleet scattered across human space. On Earth, humans looked up at the sky that was finally clear of invaders, but they did not celebrate. They knew that the war was not over. The galaxy had shown them that they were not alone, and that being alone had been the only thing keeping them safe. If they wanted to survive, they would need to become strong enough that no one would ever threaten them again. In the ruins of the old world, humanity began to build a new one. The Galactic Concordat had not held an emergency session in 4,000 years. The last time had been during the Crystal Wars, when the hegemony threatened to destroy entire star systems. But even that crisis had not brought every species to the table. This one did. 300 species sent representatives to the Great Hall on the neutral world of Terminus. Ancient races who had not spoken to each other in millennia sat side by side. Former enemies put aside their hatred to face a common concern. The chamber buzzed with 1,000 languages, all discussing the same topic. Humanity had not only survived the Dracorian invasion, they had won. The reports from Commander Vethel had spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Every species had heard about the planet that would not surrender. The soldiers who fought with smiles on their faces, the ship that had destroyed a blockade fleet in a single night. Some dismissed these stories as exaggeration. Others recognized the truth in them and trembled. The elder races, those few species old enough to remember the original quarantine, said nothing. They had known this day would come. They had hoped it would not come in their lifetimes. But the universe rarely gave anyone what they hoped for. Into this chaos walked Ambassador Kira Dawson. She was 38 years old, slim and unremarkable in appearance. Before the invasion, she had been a junior diplomat, handling minor trade disputes between nations. Then the Dracorians came, and her world changed. She had spent 6 months fighting in the ruins of Seattle, killing aliens with weapons she had built from scrap metal. She had watched friends die. She had killed enemies with her bare hands. The scars on her face and arms told the story of her survival. But Kira had not been chosen for this mission because of her fighting ability. She had been chosen because she could speak. She could make others understand. Right now, humanity needed to be understood. The chamber fell silent as she approached the central platform. 300 species watched the small human with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and hatred. The Dracorian delegation glared at her with unconcealed rage. Their empire was collapsing. The species they had conquered for centuries were rising in rebellion, inspired by the human example. The shame of their defeat had broken something fundamental in their society. Kira stood at the center of the platform and looked around at the assembled galaxy. She did not speak immediately. She wanted them to see her, to really see her. Not as a monster from their nightmares, but as a person, a survivor. A mother who had not seen her children in 6 months, a woman who wanted nothing more than to go home and rebuild. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and clear. She told them about Earth, not the Earth of their intelligence. Reports, with its military capabilities and population numbers, but the real Earth. The planet of blue oceans and green forests, of music and art and love. She told them about the cities that had burned and the people who had died. I told them about children who would never grow up and families that would never be whole again. She told them about the invasion, not the grand strategy and tactical maneuvers, but the reality of it. The terror of seeing alien ships block out the sun. The horror of watching loved ones die in plasma fire. The desperate hope of resistance, of fighting back against impossible odds with nothing but courage and stubbornness. And then she told them what humanity wanted. They did not want revenge. The Dracorians would suffer enough from their own failure. They did not want conquest. Humans had seen what empires did to the conquered, and they wanted no part of it. They did not even want isolation. The days of hiding on their single planet were over forever. What humanity wanted was simple. They wanted to be left alone. They wanted to rebuild their world without interference. They wanted to explore the stars without being attacked. Wanted to be treated as equals, not as primitives to be conquered or monsters to be feared. The elder races stirred uneasily. The young races, especially those who had suffered under Dracorian rule, listened with growing hope. One species had done what they had always dreamed of doing. One species had proven that the conquerors were not invincible. But not everyone was satisfied with Kira's words. The Velthran ambassador, representative of a species that had allied with the Dracorians, rose to speak. He demanded that humanity surrender its captured technology. He demanded that they accept confinement to their own system. He demanded that they submit to Concordat oversight to ensure they did not become a threat. Kira listened patiently. When the ambassador finished, she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator showing its teeth. She said that humanity would not surrender anything. They would not be confined. They would not submit. It paid for their freedom with blood. And they would not give it up because others were frightened. She said that humanity had two natures. They could be builders and creators, bringing art and science and medicine to the galaxy. Or they could be destroyers, turning the same energy that had defeated the Dracorians against anyone who threatened them. The galaxy could choose which humanity it wanted to deal with. But either way, humanity was here to stay. The vote took 3 days. Factions formed and reformed, ancient alliances crumbled, new partnerships emerged. The Dracorians and their allies demanded war. The younger races demanded that humanity be welcomed. The elder races said little, but their silence spoke volumes. In the end, the vote was unanimous. Humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Concordat. They would have the same rights and responsibilities as any other species. Their territory would be respected. Their ships would be allowed passage through Concordat space. The official reason was diplomatic. The real reason was fear. Every species in the chamber had seen the reports. Every species knew what humans were capable of. It was better to have them as friends than as enemies. As Kira left the chamber, she passed by a group of Velkhari delegates. These were the species that the Dracorians had enslaved for centuries, forcing them to serve as soldiers and workers. One of them stopped her with a gentle touch on her arm. He did not speak, simply bowed his head in respect. Behind him, the other Velkhari did the same. Across the chamber, other species who had suffered under Dracorian rule followed their example. Kira understood what they were saying without words. The humans had shown them that tyrants could be defeated. Humans had given them hope. She bowed. In return, and walked out into the alien sunlight, thinking of home. 20 years had passed since the invasion. The galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Dracorian Empire no longer existed. It had collapsed within 5 years of the failed invasion. torn apart by internal rebellions and external pressure. The species they had conquered for millennia rose up against them, inspired by the human example. The mighty war machine that had terrified the galaxy for 10,000 years crumbled into dust. The Galactic Concordat had become something new. It was no longer a rigid hierarchy dominated by ancient powers. It was closer to a genuine alliance of equals, where young Pessis had voices and old grudges were slowly healing. Human diplomats had played a key role in this transformation, bringing their strange talent for finding common ground between bitter enemies. Admiral Daniel Reyes stood on the bridge of the Perseverance and looked out at the stars. He was 56 years old now, his hair gray and his face lined with the weight of command. But his eyes still held the same fire they had held in the ruins of San Diego. When he had first refused to surrender, the Perseverance was humanity's flagship. The first ship built entirely by human hands for exploration beyond the Sol system. It carried a crew of 3,000 from every nation on Earth, united in the common purpose of discovering what lay beyond the known galaxy, behind Daniel. His daughter Maya worked at the navigation console. She was 20 years old, born in the last year of the war, raised in a world that was rebuilding from ashes. She had never known the Earth before the invasion, but she carried the stories of that time in her heart. Her generation understood what their parents had sacrificed to give them the stars. Their mission was not conquest. Humanity had seen what empires did, and they had no desire to become conquerors themselves. Instead, they explored and mapped and made contact with species that had never been reached by the Concordat. They brought medicine to worlds ravaged by disease. They brought technology to species still struggling with basic survival. They brought something even more valuable: hope. On Earth, the reconstruction was finally complete. New cities rose from the ruins of the old, built with a mixture of human architecture and alien technology. The scars of the invasion remained visible in monuments and museums, reminders of what humanity had survived. Every child learned the history of those terrible months, not to breed hatred, but to ensure that the lessons were never forgotten. Secretary General Kira Dawson governed the United Human Nations from a building in Geneva. She was 58 now, and the scars on her face had faded to thin white lines. But she still carried herself like a fighter, ready to defend her people against any threat. Under her leadership, humanity had channeled its aggressive instincts into construction rather than destruction. Human engineers helped rebuild worlds that had been devastated by Dracorian wars. Human doctors developed cures for diseases that had plagued alien species for millennia. Human artists created works that moved beings who had no biological connection to humanity, speaking to something universal that transcended species and culture. But humanity never forgot what it was capable of. In every major city, memorials stood to those who had died in the invasion. The names of the fallen were carved in stone and metal, millions of names that stretched for kilometers. Families came to touch the names of their ancestors and remember the price of freedom. The military remained strong. New ships were built every year, each one more powerful than the last. Soldiers trained for wars that they hoped would never come. The message to the galaxy was clear: humanity desired peace, but was prepared for war. Daniel watched as the Perseverance approached an unexplored region of space. Their sensors had detected something strange here: energy signatures that did not match any known technology. It could be a natural phenomenon. It could be the remnants of some ancient civilization. Or it could be something else entirely. Maya looked up from her console and caught her father's eye. She smiled, and for a moment, Daniel saw his younger self in her face. The same curiosity, the same courage, the same refusal to back down from the unknown. Whatever they found out here, humanity would face it together in a remote corner of space. Far beyond the reach of any Concordat sensor, an ancient machine stirred to life. It had been dormant for billions of years, left behind by the true elder races who had seeded the galaxy with life. It had one purpose: to watch and wait and judge. The machine's creators had disappeared long ago, traveling beyond the edge of the observable universe in search of something that no younger species could comprehend. But before they left, they had planted seeds throughout the galaxy. Primitive life forms that would evolve over billions of years, developing intelligence and culture and technology. Most of these experiments had failed. Some species destroyed themselves with war or pollution or short-sighted greed. Others became stagnant, achieving a certain level of technology and then never advancing further. A few had shown promise, but ultimately disappointed, becoming conquerors like the Dracorians or isolationists like the elder races. But now the machine detected something new. A species that had been overlooked in previous surveys, hidden away on a small planet in an unremarkable star system. A species that had been tested by invasion and had not only survived, but thrived. A species that combined aggression with compassion, destruction with creation, individual ambition with collective purpose. The machine analyzed human history, human culture, human biology. It studied their art and their science, their wars and their peace. It observed how they treated their own kind and how they treated others. It calculated and evaluated and judged. After a long moment, transmitted a single message to its dormant creators wherever they had gone. The message traveled faster than light, faster than thought. Using principles that no species in the galaxy had yet discovered, the message was simple. The experiment was successful. They are ready. The humans never intercepted the message. Their sensors were not advanced enough to detect it. Their scientists could not have understood it even if they had. They were too busy building their future to notice that they had passed a test. They had never known they were taking. But somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, something ancient received the message and began the long journey home. It had seeded the stars with life billions of years ago. Now it was returning to meet its children, and of all the species it had created, humanity was the one it most wanted to see. On the bridge of the Perseverance, Daniel Reyes gave the order to move forward into the unknown. Behind him, his crew prepared for whatever they might find. They were explorers and scientists and diplomats. But they were also warriors who carried the legacy of their ancestors in their blood. They were human, and the universe had finally learned what that meant.